The text illuminated my phone. Do not come to the Sunday get-together. My wife says you will ruin the elegant vibe. A bitter smile crossed my lips as my parents replied with heart emojis exactly 2 seconds later. They loved shutting out their black sheep daughter to protect their fake high society image. What they did not realize was that I owned 100% of the venture capital firm holding their fragile financial lives completely hostage. Hello to the wonderful audience of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comments, which will allow us to pay our dedicated staff and continue creating stories for you. My name is Bridget Hopkins. I am 32 years old, and I stood entirely alone in my sweeping glass-walled office, looking out over the sparkling night skyline of Denver. The city below was a sea of glittering lights, a testament to wealth and power, but the silence inside my suite was absolute. It was Friday evening, precisely 8 o'clock, and while most people were heading out to celebrate the start of the weekend, I was nursing a quiet, bitter realization. My phone vibrated against the polished mahogany desk. The screen lit up with a notification from the family group chat. It was a message from my younger brother, Dylan. I picked up the device, my eyes scanning the harsh, deliberate words. Do not come to the Sunday get-together. Chloe says you will ruin the elegant vibe of the high society party. Chloe was his newlywed wife, a woman whose entire personality was built on designer labels and recklessly maxed out credit cards. A familiar, hollow ache threatened to bloom in my chest, a remnant of the little girl who once just wanted her family's approval. I waited a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, watching to see if anyone would jump to my defense. Less than a minute passed before two tiny heart icons appeared beneath his text. One from my father, Arthur, the other from my mother, Martha. They had casually, effortlessly endorsed my absolute exclusion. Years ago, this would have shattered me. I would have spent hours crying, making desperate phone calls, begging to understand why I was never quite good enough to fit into their perfectly curated family portrait. I would have asked why my mere presence was considered a stain on their pristine, completely fabricated upper-class lifestyle. But tonight, there were no tears. The betrayal had lost its sharp edge, replaced over the years by a cold, numbing calm. I allowed myself a faint, cynical smile. I tapped a single word in reply. Understood. I placed the phone face down on the desk, cutting off their toxic digital world. I walked slowly toward the private bar tucked into the corner of my office. The soft clink of ice against crystal echoed in the massive room as I poured myself a generous measure of aged bourbon. I took a slow sip, letting the fiery liquid burn its way down my throat, grounding me in the reality of the present. My mind drifted back to the root of their deep disdain. I had always been the black sheep, the stubborn daughter who chose hard work and independence over quiet submission. They had never forgiven me for refusing the arranged, strategic marriage they had meticulously planned for me in my early 20s. That marriage was supposed to secure a massive influx of capital for Dylan, their undisputed golden boy, to fund his very first doomed business venture. When I walked away to build my own life from scratch, I was effectively dead to them. They assumed I was out there failing, scraping by in some miserable existence, serving as a convenient cautionary tale of what happens when you disobey the rigid family hierarchy. I took another sip of my drink. Turning back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the reflection staring back at me was not a failure. It was a woman in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, holding a glass of the finest whiskey money could buy. They had absolutely no idea who I had become. They had no idea that the very skyscraper I was standing in belonged entirely to me. And they certainly did not know that Meridian Peak Estates, the immensely powerful venture capital firm they constantly spoke of in hushed, reverent tones, was solely founded, owned, and controlled by the very daughter they had just banned from their Sunday dinner. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, biting wind outside, but the atmosphere inside the sprawling, marble-floored lobby of Meridian Peak Estates was entirely climate-controlled and intimidatingly quiet. Dylan and Chloe pushed through the towering revolving glass doors precisely at 9 o'clock. They carried themselves with the exaggerated, arrogant swagger of people desperately trying to project a level of immense wealth they no longer possessed. Chloe was draped in a ridiculously ostentatious silk designer coat, clutching a limited edition handbag that I knew for an absolute fact cost more than what the average American citizen earned in an entire calendar year. Dylan wore a perfectly tailored navy pinstripe suit, his hair slicked back with expensive pomade, exuding the false, fragile confidence of a man completely oblivious to his own impending doom. Through the live, high-definition security feed broadcasting to the tablet on my desk, I watched them approach the front reception area. The receptionist, a highly capable and polite young professional named Elena, greeted them with a warm, standard corporate welcome. In response, Chloe did not even bother to offer a basic greeting. She merely rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh as if acknowledging the existence of the working class was a tremendous physical burden. Dylan stepped forward, aggressively tapping the face of his heavy platinum watch, leaning heavily over the polished granite counter to dictate his presence. "We have a 9:30 appointment with the Chief Executive Officer. I am Dylan Hopkins, and this is my wife, Chloe. Tell your boss we have arrived, and we are operating on an incredibly tight schedule today," Dylan barked, his voice carrying an embarrassing, grating level of entitlement that echoed across the hushed lobby. They were playing an incredibly dangerous game of pretend, completely unaware that I held every single digital record of their disastrous financial reality. Their supposedly elite luxury wine distribution business was bleeding cash at an uncontrollable, catastrophic rate. For the past 8 months, the company had been entirely propped up by predatory, high-interest loans. Meanwhile, Chloe had systematically drained the corporate accounts to fund extravagant, senseless shopping sprees across Europe and lavish, entirely unnecessary renovations to their suburban mansion. They were less than 30 days away from facing complete and utter bankruptcy, a total financial collapse. To save his rapidly sinking ship, Dylan had spent the last half of the year begging my acquisitions department for a meeting. He had sent dozens of desperate, groveling emails, called our lower-level executives incessantly, and practically pleaded for just 15 minutes of FaceTime with the mysterious, anonymous billionaire founder of the firm. He was entirely convinced that his undeniable personal charm and fabricated upper-class pedigree would easily secure a massive multi-million-dollar bailout. At exactly 9:25, my senior executive assistant, a brilliant woman with an absolutely flawless poker face, approached the couple in the lobby. She introduced herself with sharp professional coldness and guided them past the security checkpoints, leading them toward the private, biometric-secured elevator reserved exclusively for my top floor. I tracked their agonizingly slow ascent up to the 45th floor. When the polished steel elevator doors parted, the thick, soundproof oak double doors of the VIP boardroom stood wide open, waiting for them like a beautifully decorated trap. The room was specifically designed to intimidate, featuring a massive, polished obsidian table that stretched for yards, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying, godlike view of the entire city. At the far end of the long table sat my heavy leather chairman's chair. I was already seated in it, intentionally turned entirely around to face the sprawling metropolis below, leaving only the high, dark leather back of the chair visible from the entrance. I heard the sharp, arrogant click of their expensive leather shoes against the gleaming hardwood floor as they stepped inside the room. "Wow," Chloe whispered loudly, her voice dripping with greedy, undisguised awe as she took in the opulent, intimidating surroundings. "Dylan, look at this view. Look at the artwork. This is exactly the kind of elite financial backing we deserve. Be charming today. Do whatever you have to do to get that check." "I know exactly what I am doing," Dylan hissed back confidently, aggressively clearing his throat to announce their arrival to the back of the imposing chair. "Excuse me, We are the Hopkins. We greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy morning to discuss the highly profitable future of our luxury enterprise. I let the heavy, pregnant silence stretch out for 10 agonizing seconds. The quiet in the massive room grew thicker, heavy enough to physically choke on. Then, I placed both of my hands firmly on the armrests and slowly, deliberately, pushed off the floor with the heel of my shoe. The heavy, specialized mechanism of the chair glided smoothly and silently. As I rotated into their line of sight, the smug, triumphant smile plastered across Chloe's heavily contoured face froze instantly. Her jaw dropped slightly, and every single ounce of color violently drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly, ghostly pale. Her eyes widened in absolute paralyzing horror as her brain struggled violently to process the sheer impossibility of the woman sitting directly across from her. Dylan physically recoiled, taking a clumsy, stumbling step backward until his shoulder hit the heavy doorframe. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. He blinked rapidly, staring at me sitting comfortably in my sharp black power suit, my hands calmly resting on the cold obsidian table. "Bridget?" Dylan choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. He looked around the massive room wildly, desperate for an escape route or some logical, comforting explanation. "What on earth are you doing in here? This is the chief executive's private office. Are you an assistant here? Did the Human Resources Department make some kind of incredibly stupid scheduling mistake? We have a highly confidential, multi-million-dollar meeting with the head of this firm." I did not offer him the basic courtesy of a smile. I did not waste my breath correcting his pathetic, scrambling delusions. Instead, I reached into the sleek black leather portfolio resting beside me and pulled out a thick, bright red financial dossier. It was the complete, devastating line-by-line audit of their dying company. With a sharp, calculated flick of my wrist, I tossed the heavy folder across the length of the polished table. It slid aggressively over the smooth obsidian surface, stopping dead just 1 inch from Dylan's trembling, clammy hands. "There is no administrative mistake, Dylan," I said, my voice incredibly low, dangerously calm, and echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "I am the founder. I am the chief executive officer. And as of this exact second, I am the sole person holding the miserable, pathetic life of your little wine company directly in the palm of my hand." The shock paralyzing Chloe only lasted for a fleeting moment before it morphed into an ugly, defensive rage. She slammed her expensive handbag onto the table, the heavy metal hardware clanking loudly against the stone. Her face flushed a deep, furious red. "This is an absolute joke," Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the thick glass walls. "You set this whole elaborate thing up. You hired an actor or paid off some low-level assistant to let you sit in this chair just to get back at us. You are doing this because you are bitter about the text message on Sunday. You are actually pathetic. Bridget, we are leaving right now to find the real executives." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached across the polished console and pressed a single silver button. The heavy mechanical blinds dropped smoothly over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the massive room into a cool, intimidating dimness. Above us, a hidden, high-definition projector hummed to life, beaming a massive, crystal-clear image onto the blank white wall behind me. "Take a seat, Chloe," I commanded, my tone completely devoid of any human emotion. "Or stand. It makes zero difference to the United States Internal Revenue Service." Dylan turned heavily, staring at the screen. His jaw dropped. Displayed in glowing, undeniable high definition were the exact bank statements of his supposedly elite distribution company from the past 12 months. "Let us thoroughly review the grim reality of your brilliant enterprise," I began, using a sleek laser pointer to highlight a column of massive, bleeding negative numbers. "You have completely defaulted on 3 separate high-interest commercial loans. You currently owe your primary European suppliers over $800,000. You do not even have enough liquid cash to cover your basic payroll for the next 14 days. But that is merely your surface-level incompetence." I clicked a button. Moving to the next slide, it showed a highly detailed series of offshore wire transfers, padded invoices, and completely falsified expense reports. Here is the exact point where your terrible business management crosses the line into a major federal crime. I continued smoothly, slicing through the tension in the room. You have been intentionally misclassifying Chloe's personal luxury vacations to Italy, her high-end designer wardrobe purchases, and your extravagant home renovations as deductible corporate business expenses. You are systematically embezzling funds from a failing corporate entity to support a lavish lifestyle you absolutely cannot afford, while simultaneously committing egregious, undeniable tax fraud. If I hand this comprehensive file over to the federal authorities, you are not just looking at a humiliating public bankruptcy, you are looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years inside a federal penitentiary. Chloe's mouth snapped shut, the defiant, arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, completely replaced by a raw, suffocating terror. Dylan's knees physically gave out, and he collapsed heavily into one of the dark leather guest chairs, burying his pale face deeply into his trembling hands. The crushing weight of their reality had finally shattered their delusions. I pulled a heavy silver fountain pen from my pocket and placed it deliberately on top of a single, freshly printed legal document. I slid the thick stack of paper across the smooth table until it rested directly in front of my brother. This is an aggressive, non-negotiable corporate buyout agreement, I stated flatly, leaving no room for debate. Meridian Peak Estates will absorb your entire debt portfolio. We will pay off your angry suppliers and legally settle your outstanding loans. In exchange, my firm is acquiring 100% absolute equity and total ownership in your company for the Grand Co. Final total of $1. Dylan looked up, his eyes bloodshot, wide, and desperate. $1? You are stealing my entire life's work for $1? I am saving you from a federal criminal indictment, I corrected him sharply, my eyes narrowing. Furthermore, under Section 4 of that contract, you are entirely stripped of your title as Chief Executive Officer. You and your wife will be immediately reclassified as low-level, salaried sales associates. You will report directly to a strict regional manager that I personally appoint. You will have zero executive authority, zero access to any corporate bank accounts, and zero equity. Bridget, please, Dylan begged, leaning forward and clasping his hands together in a pathetic, groveling display of submission. We are family. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. Blood is supposed to protect blood. Mom and Dad would be absolutely devastated if they saw you tearing me down like this. Please, I am begging you. Give me a fighting chance. Give me a fair financial deal. We share the same last name. I stood up slowly, leaning my weight forward onto the hard table, locking my cold eyes directly onto his trembling, pathetic frame. Do not ever dare invoke the concept of family to me, I snarled, my voice dropping to a dangerous, venomous whisper. Where exactly was that sacred blood loyalty on Sunday? You and your wife banned me from your fake, pretentious dinner party because you thought my mere presence would dirty your elite aesthetic. You thought I was a failure. You decided I was not good enough to sit at your table. And now, you are literally crying and begging for the scraps from mine. I reached over to the communication console on my desk and pressed the bright red security button. Security team, stand by for an immediate physical escort on the 45th floor, I said clearly into the intercom. I turned back to Dylan, tapping my index finger aggressively against the crystal face of my watch. You have exactly 60 seconds, I declared, my voice echoing like a ruthless judge delivering a final, inescapable sentence. Sign the paper and accept your new, miserable lives as my lowest-ranking employees. Or you can walk out of those doors right now, and I will personally ensure the bankruptcy courts and the tax authorities receive your complete, unredacted financial files by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The clock is ticking. That evening, the silence of my penthouse was shattered by a relentless, pathetic symphony of incoming notifications. My phone, which had remained entirely quiet during the weekend of my supposedly devastating family banishment, was now vibrating violently against the marble kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of water and watched the screen light up with exactly 42 missed calls. Every single one of them was from my parents. The very same people who had gladly endorsed my exclusion from their pristine lives less than 48 hours ago were now desperately fighting for my attention. When the calls went unanswered, the text messages began pouring in. My mother, Martha, suddenly remembered how to use her smartphone for something other than passive-aggressive heart emojis. Her messages were a sickeningly sweet masterclass in absolute hypocrisy. My dearest Bridget. The first message read, dripping with a manufactured warmth that made my stomach turn. We just heard the incredibly shocking news from your brother. We had absolutely no idea you were running such a massive, successful firm. Your father and I are bursting with pride. You have always been our brilliant, fiercely independent girl. I scoffed aloud at the glowing screen. The sudden revision of family history was laughable. Her next message arrived barely 10 seconds later, pivoting seamlessly to the real objective. Dylan is beside himself, sweetheart. You know how boys are. He made a very foolish, immature mistake with that silly text message on Sunday, and his business got a little out of hand. But he is your little brother. Please, darling, try to understand his foolishness and reverse that horrible contract. Family must forgive family. Let us all sit down this weekend and fix this over a nice, warm dinner. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply swiped the notifications away, turned off the device, and went to sleep with the deepest, most restful peace I had felt in over a decade. The next morning at exactly 7:30, I stepped out of the private elevator and into the lavish, highly secured lobby of my luxury condominium building. The concierge gave me a polite nod, but his eyes darted nervously toward the plush leather waiting area. Sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking entirely out of place in his wrinkled beige slacks and faded golf shirt, was my father, Arthur. He stood up quickly as I approached, pasting a nervous, wildly uncomfortable smile across his aging face. In his hands, he was awkwardly clutching a small white cardboard bakery box tied with a thin red string. "Bridget, good morning," he said, his voice overly enthusiastic, though his eyes darted around the intimidatingly expensive lobby. "I know it is very early, but I wanted to catch you before you went up to your big office. Look what I brought. The cherry turnovers from that little bakery on Elm Street. I remembered they were your absolute favorite when you were 10 years old. I thought we could share them and have a real heart-to-heart talk." I looked down at the cheap cardboard box and then back up into his desperate, calculating eyes. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at emotional manipulation. He honestly believed he could erase decades of emotional neglect and secure a multi-million-dollar pardon with a $5 pastry. "I stopped eating sugar 15 years ago. Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby like a blade of ice. I did not call him Dad. That title had to be earned, and he had forfeited it long ago. "And you did not drive all the way downtown in morning traffic to reminisce about my childhood. You are here because Dylan called you crying." Arthur's fake smile faltered, his shoulders slumping slightly as the bakery box lowered to his side. "Bridget, you are being completely unreasonable. You practically stole your brother's company yesterday. You humiliated him. He is your family. You have so much money now. Why would you ruin him like this?" "I did not ruin him," I corrected sharply, stepping closer so he could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "His own incompetence ruined him. I simply put a stop to the financial bleeding. The real question is, why did you and Martha enable his toxic delusions for so long? In fact, why do you not tell me exactly how you funded his failing enterprise 6 months ago?" Arthur physically recoiled, the remaining color draining from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Yes, I know everything," I continued, my words hitting him like physical blows. "When the corporate banks finally cut Dylan off, he came crying to you, and instead of telling your golden boy to get a real job, you and Martha secretly took out a massive second mortgage on your own home. You leveraged your entire retirement, a sum of $400,000, just to keep his fake luxury lifestyle afloat." "How could you possibly know about that?" Arthur whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shame and rising panic. That was a highly confidential bank loan. Because the bank heavily downgraded that loan when you missed your last two payments, I stated coldly, delivering the final, crushing blow. They packaged your failing mortgage as a toxic asset and sold it off to the highest bidder at a steep discount. And the firm that purchased that bad debt last month was a massive real estate subsidiary wholly owned and operated by Meridian Peak Estates. The bakery box slipped from Arthur's completely numb fingers, hitting the polished marble floor with a dull thud. The cherry pastry spilled out, crushed and ruined. He stood absolutely paralyzed, his breathing shallow and rapid. In that devastating moment, the reality of the situation crashed down upon him. He slowly realized that the entire family, from Dylan's pathetic career to the very roof over his and Martha's heads, was completely at the mercy of the daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like garbage. When a toxic, deeply arrogant man is finally backed into an inescapable corner, he rarely ever experiences a moment of self-reflection or genuine remorse. Instead, like a desperate, cornered rat, he will inevitably try to bite the very hand that holds his cage. Dylan was absolutely no exception to this rule. Realizing that he was entirely outmatched in the legal and financial arenas, he decided to resort to the only tactic he had left. He decided to play dirty. In a frantic, highly illegal move, Dylan bypassed the security protocols of his own failing company. He spent hours downloading the highly confidential, unredacted master database of his exclusive VIP client list onto a single, encrypted flash drive. This list contained the private purchasing habits, personal addresses, and sensitive financial data of hundreds of extremely wealthy individuals. It was the only tangible asset his ruined company had left, and he was determined to use it to secure his escape. His master plan was to sell this highly classified data directly to Vanguard Apex Financial, an aggressive, cutthroat investment group widely known throughout the financial district as my absolute biggest corporate rival. Dylan negotiated a swift underground deal for a massive lump sum of untraceable offshore cash. He intended to take the money, abandon his crushing debts, and flee the country with his wife before the legal fallout could even reach him. He was so blindly confident in his brilliant scheme that he actually sent me a text message on Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk when the notification chimed. "I do not need a single penny of your filthy, controlling money," the message read, radiating a smug, pathetic arrogance. "I just secured a massive, life-changing cash deal with your absolute biggest competitor. We are signing the paperwork this afternoon, taking the cash, and leaving the country tonight. You thought you could trap me and strip away my dignity, but I am 10 steps ahead of you. You lose. Have a miserable, lonely life." I read the message twice. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face as I locked my phone and placed it into my pocket. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He had absolutely no idea that he had just voluntarily walked blindfolded into the final, inescapable jaw of my trap. Across the city, inside the heavily guarded, opulent VIP lounge of the Grand Monarch Hotel, Dylan and Chloe were practically vibrating with greedy excitement. They were seated at a small, velvet-lined table, drinking complimentary champagne. Chloe was already excitedly scrolling through luxury real estate listings in Monaco on her phone, completely convinced that their financial nightmare was finally over. Sitting directly across from them was Marcus, the polished, incredibly charismatic Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Apex Financial. Marcus smiled warmly, exuding the comforting, authoritative aura of a man who was about to save their lives. "You have brought us a truly invaluable asset today, Dylan," Marcus said smoothly, gesturing toward the small silver flash drive resting on the center of the table. "This level of market data is exactly what Vanguard needs to completely crush Meridian Peak Estates in the upcoming fiscal quarter. For this, we are prepared to authorize an immediate wire transfer of $2.5 million directly into your private overseas account, exactly as discussed." "It is a pleasure doing business with a real professional," Dylan replied, puffing out his chest and adjusting his expensive silk tie. He threw a smug, victorious look at his wife. Meridian Peak is run by an absolute amateur. She never even saw this coming. Marcus chuckled softly, a sound that lacked any genuine warmth. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, beautifully bound contract, sliding it across the table alongside a heavy gold pen. Just sign on the dotted line, Dylan, and the funds will be released instantly, Marcus instructed. Dylan picked up the gold pen. His hand was practically shaking with adrenaline and greed. He pressed the metal tip against the thick paper, ready to finalize his grand betrayal. Right at that exact millisecond, Marcus reached out, clamped his hand firmly over the document, and calmly slid it away from Dylan's reach. Dylan froze, looking up in sudden, aggressive confusion. "Excuse me? What are you doing?" "I am ready to sign." Marcus did not answer him. Instead, he looked over Dylan's shoulder and offered a polite, deferential nod toward the heavy oak doors of the private lounge, which had just swung wide open. Dylan and Chloe turned their heads simultaneously. Walking through the doors was not a hotel waiter or a corporate assistant. It was Victor, my personal, ruthlessly aggressive lead corporate litigation attorney. He was flanked by two large men wearing sharp, nondescript gray suits. Victor casually adjusted his glasses, walking directly up to the table. He did not look at Dylan. He looked directly at Marcus. "Is the digital asset secured, Marcus?" Victor asked in a sharp, strictly professional tone. "The asset is secured, Victor," Marcus replied, dropping his previously warm demeanor entirely. He picked up the silver flash drive and handed it directly to my lawyer, completely ignoring Dylan's horrified, sputtering gasps. "Wait, what is happening here?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. "Who is this man? Give us our money right now." Victor finally turned his cold, predatory gaze toward my brother. "Good afternoon, Dylan. I am here representing the sole owner of Meridian Peak Estates," Victor said, his voice ringing with absolute, crushing authority. "And I am here to inform you that there is no $2.5 million wire transfer. In fact, there is no Vanguard Apex Financial, at least, not in the way you desperately hoped." Dylan stood up violently, his chair crashing backward onto the thick carpet. "What are you talking about? Vanguard is your biggest rival. They are an independent firm." "Vanguard Apex Financial is a corporate ghost," Victor explained slowly, dragging out every single syllable to ensure maximum psychological damage. "It is a highly sophisticated shell company. My client established it exactly 36 months ago. She uses it strictly as a covert acquisition vehicle to quietly test the loyalty and legality of failing, desperate competitors. You thought you were selling secrets to her enemy. In reality, you just walked into a room and handed stolen corporate data directly back to the very woman you were trying to rob." The blood completely vanished from Dylan's face. He stumbled backward, his knees knocking together as the horrific reality of his situation violently dismantled his brain. The spectacular, perfectly orchestrated twist had just snapped his spine. "And because my client currently holds all of your corporate debt and initiated a hostile takeover yesterday," Victor continued relentlessly, raising the silver flash drive into the air, "this data legally belongs to Meridian Peak Estates. By attempting to sell it to an outside party for personal gain, you have officially crossed the line from civil bankruptcy into severe criminal territory." Before Dylan could even form a coherent sentence to defend himself, the two large men in the gray suits stepped forward, pulling out their heavy gold badges. "Dylan Hopkins," one of the men barked, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "We are federal agents with the Economic Crimes Division. You are under immediate arrest for felony theft of trade secrets, severe violation of corporate non-disclosure agreements, and attempted grand wire fraud. Put your hands securely behind your back." Chloe let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. Her legs completely gave out beneath her, and she collapsed heavily onto the plush red carpet of the luxury hotel, tearing at her expensive hair. Dylan did not run. He did not fight. He simply sank to his knees beside his screaming wife, utterly broken. His wrists violently snapped into heavy steel handcuffs. Every single escape route, every desperate lie, and every ounce of his pathetic arrogance had been meticulously calculated, legally boxed in, and permanently slammed shut. The highly anticipated Sunday get-together did not actually happen on Sunday. It was hastily rescheduled to Saturday evening, less than 48 hours after Dylan was handcuffed in that hotel lobby. But this gathering was not a celebration of high society elegance. It was a desperate, humiliating surrender. My parents had frantically organized this meeting at their suburban home, begging my legal team to arrange my presence so they could plead for their absolute survival. I agreed to attend. After all, it was the exact same dinner party they had so proudly banned me from just a few days prior. I parked my sleek black car in the driveway of my childhood home. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with towering oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns. I walked up the stone pathway and pushed open the heavy oak front door without bothering to knock. I stepped into the grand foyer, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the hardwood floor. The atmosphere inside the house was entirely suffocating. The living room, usually filled with loud, arrogant chatter and the clinking of expensive wine glasses, was dead silent. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody even dared to breathe too loudly. My father, Arthur, and my mother, Martha, were sitting rigidly on the edge of the floral sofa, looking 10 years older than they had yesterday. Dylan, who had been temporarily released on a massive federal bail bond that my parents had desperately scraped together, sat slumped in a wingback chair. His face was a bruised, exhausted mask of total defeat. Chloe sat on the floor near his feet, her expensive makeup completely washed away by hours of hysterical crying. I walked slowly into the formal dining room, trailing my hand along the edge of the long mahogany table. This was the table where I was never allowed to sit at the head. This was the table where they had mocked my ambitions. I took my seat at the very head of the table, commanding the room with absolute silence. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults. I simply opened my leather portfolio and withdrew 2 thick, legally binding documents, placing them squarely in the center of the polished wood. I am only going to say this exactly one time, I began, my voice steady, cool, and devoid of any familial warmth. I hold the mortgage to this house, I hold the complete debt portfolio of your ruined company, and I hold the single, deciding vote on whether or not the federal prosecutors push for a maximum prison sentence for your brilliant son. You have absolutely zero leverage. My mother let out a small, pathetic sob, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Arthur stared at the floor, utterly broken. However, I continued, leaning back into my chair, I have absolutely no interest in spending the next 5 years of my life tied up in messy courtroom battles with people I do not respect. So, here is my final offer. I will purchase your entire mountain of debt. I will allow Arthur and Martha to keep living in this house until they pass away, and I will officially order my legal team to drop the corporate theft charges, keeping Dylan out of a federal penitentiary. Dylan lifted his head, a weak, desperate glimmer of hope flashing in his bloodshot eyes. You will really do that? You will let us go? I will do it on exactly one condition, I stated, tapping my finger heavily against the thick stack of papers. This document is a permanent, irrevocable severance of all legal and personal ties. By signing this, you are completely surrendering any future claim to my estate, my wealth, and my company. You are permanently abandoning the right to call yourselves my family. If you sign this, you will never contact me again. You will never approach my office. You will never speak my name in public. If any of you violate this agreement, every single debt will be instantly reinstated, and I will personally see to it that you are completely destroyed. Chloe practically crawled across the carpet, resting her head against the edge of the mahogany table, tears streaming down her pale, exhausted face. Bridget, please, Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking. I am so incredibly sorry. I am so sorry for that terrible text message. I was jealous. I was stupid. Please forgive me. We were so wrong about you. I picked up a delicate porcelain teacup from the tray my mother had nervously prepared before my arrival. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the warm chamomile tea. letting the silence stretch out and dominate the room. I looked down at Chloe, offering her a calm, chillingly bright smile. "The air in here is suddenly so fresh," I said smoothly, placing the cup back onto the saucer with a quiet clink. "Perhaps because the toxic people have finally realized their exact place in the world. Save your apologies. Chloe, just sign the paper, one by one." They approached the table. Arthur's hand shook violently as he took the pen, scratching his signature across the bottom line. Martha wept silently as she signed away her only daughter. Dylan hesitated for a fraction of a second before scribbling his name, sealing his own miserable, defeated fate. Chloe signed last, her tears staining the thick parchment. When the final signature was complete, I calmly gathered the documents, placed them back into my leather portfolio, and snapped it shut. I stood up from the table. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer a final glance of pity. I simply turned my back on them and walked out the front door, leaving them alone in the quiet, suffocating prison of their own making. I stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air of Denver. The city lights were glowing brightly against the dark sky. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway for the absolute last time. As I drove down the empty highway, a profound, overwhelming silence filled the cabin of my car. It was not the lonely, aching silence of my childhood. It was the beautiful, weightless silence of total liberation. I had finally cut the anchor. The burden of their greed was gone forever, and the rest of my life, completely and entirely mine, was just beginning. Thank you so much to our wonderful audience for listening to today's story. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Let us know in the comments. If you found this story entertaining and satisfying, please consider helping us out with just a $1 donation. You can scan the donation QR code directly on your screen, or use the donation link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your incredible support allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families, and ensures that we can continue creating even better stories for you to enjoy. Thank you, and have a beautiful day.